Hey, do you want to beat the Caro-Kann every single time in only 5 moves? Or maybe to put it a little bit more statistically correct, do you want to be able to beat the Caro-Kann very quickly 80% of the time? Well, maybe you want to check out this trap line, because there is a line you can play against the Caro-Kann that seems to work even against really strong players with a tremendously high success rate. And the line I'm talking about is this. After e4 c6, instead of playing any one of the standard moves, you can play this move, pawn to d3, which looks very innocuous, and it doesn't seem like we have that big of a plan. This is known as the Breyer variation, or as Lee Chess categorizes it, this is the unambitious Breyer variation. But as we will see, there is a little bit of a trap here that, for whatever reason, everybody does just seem to fall for, and it comes in this line. After d5, which is obviously the most logical move, you would expect white to play knight to d2. This would be the typical way to continue, and maybe white will be setting up some sort of King's Indian attack setup where we're going to go like this and then later play for some sort of kingside attack. But there also exists this move, knight to f3, and so far it feels like white has kind of just played like a complete patzer. Like d3, not very ambitious, knight to f3, kind of ignoring the fact that black was just going to be taking here on e4, and if you take back, we're just going to see a queen swap. Okay, that doesn't seem too terribly interesting, and it just seems like maybe white doesn't know exactly what they're doing. And then to compound that, to make that even worse, after all of this, white just decides to move the knight for a second time and play knight to g5, and you can already get kind of an idea. I have the database here so you can see which moves are most popular in every position, and also keep note, especially in this one, of the win percentages. It gets kind of crazy at some point. Now, after e takes d3, here white will just simply recapture. Bishop takes d3, and here we are. We are on the 5th move of the game, and more often than not, players with the black pieces will simply play a move that loses immediately. And some of these moves include knight to f6, which accounts for 59.6% of all total games. There's h6, which occurs in 16.5% of all games. e6 probably doesn't lose, but it's not particularly good, and you'll see that 9.3% of the time. And you might be thinking maybe this is just at the lower levels, but even if you filter for 2500 and above, you'll still see 82% of the time. This is actually 62.9% of all total games. White is going to win this a tremendously high amount of time. And if you've never seen this position before, I do think that it is particularly difficult to come up with the right move as black, but it's not too terribly hard to understand the main trap that black has set. And you can see it in a line like knight to f6. This is actually the most common way that people play, and white is just going to win this a tremendously large amount of time. And the reason that we're winning has to do with the fact that the queens are actually on the same file. And it might not look like there's any way to exploit that immediately. In this position, the queen is actually defended by the king, but after knight takes f7, forking the queen and the rook, if black is to now take the knight, which is the most sensible way to continue, you're going to play bishop to g6. And this is the means by which you remove the defense of the queen, you force the king to recapture, or you can take with this h-pawn. But now, queen takes d8, and white has just simply won a piece. And it's exactly the same if you get this position back here, and instead of knight to f6, if the opponent does decide to play pawn to h6, it's exactly the same. You play knight to f7, you take, you fork, and after they recapture, you play bishop to g6, and this wins the game. Again, you just are able to take the queen. And this may remind you of another particularly, I don't know if it's a strong trap, but it's a trap that players do tend to fall for at a very high frequency, and that is the Tennyson Gambit. So this one against the Caro-Kann looks a lot like this opening that you can play against the Scandinavian, where it's again kind of the same trick via a different move order. If you can get to this position, you can see most often people are playing h6, or at least 30% of the time. This is the move that you can expect to face, after which you do the same sort of tactic. So if you're looking for this, you can do it against the Caro-Kann, against the Scandinavian. Today we're going to be focused mostly on what to do against the Caro-Kann, but we can already see this is a trap that might score you a ton of points. Well, okay, what if black plays just a little bit better? Let's come back to the starting position and run this back one more time. So after we get to here, we play knight to f3, takes when we play knight to g5, sacrificing a pawn. And after this recapture, we take back. What is black actually supposed to do? Like, we have this threat of just taking on f7, but surely black can play a little bit better than just to develop a piece or just to play h6. Well, what are you supposed to do? It turns out most players here that avoid the trap are going to want to play the move pawn to e6, and this actually prevents our threat of taking on f7, so we want to reconsider what we want to do. And it looks like white has played moves such as knight to c3. White has tried castling. This seems like just very normal, like you get here, but you might be able to play even better. But before I show you what the best move is, I would also like to just mention that knight takes f7 does not work in this position, because now after this recapture, if you were to play bishop to g6, which is what white is doing in most of these games, what you will notice is what black can actually defend the queen. However, you will notice the most popular move here is to just simply blunder the queen away. But it shouldn't work because black is in time to play king to e7, and even if you hit him with bishop to g5, thinking perhaps, aha, I've skewered you, now I win you at last, well, no, knight to f6 just comes in, and even if you take this, hoping that they take with the king, they're going to be taking with a pawn. You're a piece down. The queens are attacking each other, so they're going to get swapped off. This guy is hanging. It's not going to be very good for you at all. So after pawn to e6, what should we be doing as white? And there is a very interesting move here that does seem to work very well. And the move is knight takes h7. This was another point of putting the bishop on d3 and the knight on g5. We were attacking the h-pawn, and so here we can just simply take it. And if black doesn't really do too much, we will just happily grab this bishop, and we'll have the bishop pair, and we'll take that into the endgame, and we should have a very reasonable position. Like, if knight to f6, which is the second most popular move, we're just going to take this guy, and we'll head into this endgame where we should be doing pretty well. If we put on Stockfish, it's actually plus 1.2. This is a very strong position for us. Okay, no problems here. So what is black meant to do if you go here and you just simply take their h-pawn? Well, what most players are going to try to do is they're going to play bishop to e7, which looks like a very good move. This controls the g5 square, so at least for the moment, it's like, okay, our knight is not actually threatened to be captured just yet, but it looks like maybe we're getting it into a little bit of trouble. Maybe it'll get locked in there and it won't be able to come back into the game. But you actually have this very clever move, queen to h5, voluntarily entering a pin and lining up with the opponent's rook. And the reason this is so strong is that simply we are just threatening something like knight to f6. So like the second most common move for black is knight to f6. Well, that doesn't do anything because we are going to be recapturing here, snagging this rook, and fantastic, we've just won a lot of material. Okay, so what are they going to do? Well, they got to do something forcing, or else we're just going to play this and we're going to win the rook. So what they tend to do is they're going to be playing pawn to g6. This is what happens. But now you just get to sacrifice. You play bishop takes g6, f takes g6, queen takes g6, and it's, okay, 2 pawns for a piece, but look at this. If the king's got to go to d7, obviously there should be some serious issues. And there's 2 things that you can do with white. You can see the most popular thing that's been played is queen to g7, attacking this rook, and this is definitely sufficient. There's no way for black to defend the rook. If you were to move the knight, for example, well, you just remind the opponent, hey, you're in a pin, I take on f6, and I just win material, easy peasy. And what that means is, okay, they don't have any good way to defend it, so they're just going to be like taking this and whatever, and obviously this is very good for us. We've won some material, so it says it's plus 1.9, blah, blah, blah. Well, it also turns out that back in this position after king to d7, instead of just playing queen to g7, which wins material on the spot, you can also get a major advantage by just developing your pieces. Put your bishop on f4, your knight on c3, get castled on the queen side, and you can just play for this big attack. You don't have to win material because your position is so strong, and it's really, really hard for black to develop any pieces. So just bring everything out, and attack is another good way to continue. So that is what you're going to face quite often. And what I think is actually really hard about this position is when the opponent gets here, it's very, very difficult for them to find the right move. And I don't think I've ever seen this with another opening, but the right move is only played about 2% of the time. And really, that's uncharacteristic for any opening that I've ever studied. Usually people tend to know, and the move that the computer gives for black is this move, knight to d7, and perhaps there's actually a couple different ways black can play that are very reasonable, but knight to d7 is the one that is Stockfish's top choice, and maybe this is the way that black should play. But I think even here, there are a lot of tricks and traps that you can use, and a lot of opponents will simply not be able to play the way that the computer plays in order to defend this. There's like one crazy defensive line, but even if you get it, I don't think humans are going to be able to defend. But I will test you here. If you had the white pieces in this position, what would you play? Because again, I think this is another very difficult question. And you want to be very careful, and I think a lot of people actually mess this up with white. Now, let me tell you a couple of the things that you should not do with white. I think one of the temptations we've seen in all the other lines that correct was taking on f7 or maybe taking on h7. These tended to be correct in the other lines. But here, if you just take on f7, black will take back. And perhaps you got here and noticed that you do have queen to h5 check. And if black is to play g6, which would be the logical way to try to attack your queen and make her move away, you do have bishop takes g6. And after pawn takes, you can take the rook. And we've traded 2 pieces for a rook, which is actually not a very good trade in our favor. The problem here is that after bishop to g7, for example, if we just bob Stockfish back on, we're going to have to move our queen back somewhere. And it's actually black that is going to be able to develop a bigger initiative. Black has 2 pieces for a rook. That's good for black. And really, it's black that is a little bit more active than us. This guy will come here. This guy will go somewhere. Bishop will come out. And it's actually black that has a fantastic position. So let's take that off the table. Let's not sacrifice on f7. What else are we going to do? Well, if you're familiar with these kinds of positions, another tactic that sometimes occurs and is almost brilliant for white is this crazy move, knight to e6. And this almost works, and some opponents might take the bait and just decide to take this knight, which was attacking the queen, and this allows a beautiful finish, because now you just have queen to h5, and after g6, you can sacrifice on g6, hopefully with the queen, because that's cool, and you can get this very fantastic checkmate, and boom, if they take the bait, this is great. However, unfortunately, knight to e6 doesn't work, because black actually has a very good move with the queen. Like, the queen is attacked, you can't take the knight, but unfortunately, queen to a5 ends up being a very strong move. Now they're attacking our king, and if we defend it some easy way, like our knight is going to be hanging. But if we play bishop to d2, they can just play queen to e5, and sadly, we are not going to be able to keep our knight. We can imagine them swapping off the queens, taking our knight, and ruining our life. But it turns out there is potentially some good option here for white, where you have the opportunity to sacrifice for a tremendous amount of compensation. Now, before I tell you exactly what I think you should play, I do want to show you what Stockfish thinks you should play, and also the top 2 human moves, which are castles and knight to h7. And the point of knight to d7 has a lot of points to it. And there's another point that I would like to reveal that you see in both of these lines, whether white is to castle, whether white is to take on h7, you're going to see a theme that black has available to them that I think we should take into account before we decide what to do with white on this move. Now, for example, Stockfish says castle, most popular is castle. Let's check it out. If castles, we now see what black is plotting all along. You now have this move, knight to e5. A secondary point of the knight coming to d7 is that it has the opportunity to harass our bishop on d3. Also, it's very nice for black that it's protecting f7, but in any line where we're going to be losing our bishop, if material is equal and black has the 2 bishops, probably we're not going to have that great of a position. Like, you can imagine bishop takes h7. This is the Stockfish line. It says swap the queens, because otherwise white will be swapping the queens, which would be advantageous. But now after knight to f6, suddenly the bishop is getting trapped in the sense that wherever we go, black is going to be able to take it and end up with the 2 bishops in the endgame. So this is something that we don't want to do if we can avoid. Now, the other problem with this position is if we play knight takes h7, it's a very similar thing. In this case, black actually has 2 options. They can go to c5 or e5, so whichever way they do decide to go, even if we get this, In this case, black will be able to damage our structure by taking on d3, and after this recapture, we could have taken on d3 with the queen or whatever. Doesn't really matter. We have this target on the half-open d file, so at some point, our d-pawn might become a weakness that we're going to have to babysit and defend for the rest of the game. We don't want to be doing any of this. We want to do this following line, and there's this secondary line by Stockfish, but it allows some amazing sacrifices, and again, it's this case after bishop to c4, where most players are going to be messing up, and it's particularly useful to be on c4 now all of a sudden, because now the knight is not going to be able to harass our bishop in the same way, and if e6, which is the most popular move, we are going to be threatening all sorts of sacrifices that black now needs to consider on every move. Like maybe we'll take this, maybe we'll take this, maybe we'll take this, and our opponent needs to be cautious on every move, and we get to have the fun of trying to calculate them and seeing what we can come up with. Now, after castles, we again reach a very critical position. Now, I think this would be incredibly hard for a human to play like the computer from here on out. It's like actually impossible. I think, well, I'll show you what the computer move is at the end, but I think these are both very reasonable moves that your opponents might try. And in the only 7 games that have been played, bishop to e7 and knight g to f6 are the moves that people would play. I mean, that it's all very sensible. Bishop e7 is very sensible. It's attacking the knight for a second time, so now black is just threatening to take. And here, there is an incredible move for white. We're looking, of course, for sacrifices on one of these 2 squares, and there actually is one, and it's bishop takes e6. This is the move that turns out to work very well for white, because now if bishop takes g5, for example, we are going to be able to play not bishop takes f7, which was played in the only game that's ever happened, but this does sort of reveal the main point of what we're doing of these sacrifices, is that we're going to have queen h5 at some moment in order to win this bishop on g5, but we've given up a bishop to get here, so we've actually lost a piece. A better way for us to continue after they take our knight is to play queen to h5, pinning this pawn, attacking this guy for another time, and now if g6, for example, to try to get our queen to go away, instead of sacking on f7, we can actually take on d7, and this way we are not losing a piece. And at the end of the day, material here is going to be equal, but we are preventing white from castling, and it's becoming a little bit more difficult to develop this knight. And the rook is coming to e1. We should be able to get the knight out very quickly, bring all of our rooks into the game. Maybe we can get to the 7th rank very quickly. Something like this should be very good for white. Now, computers will play f6, and the line will keep going. Something like this, which also prevents black from castling queenside, and the line will keep going, but this is a fantastic achievement for white. Okay, so let's go back. Bishop to e7, okay, maybe not the best that black can possibly do. What about knight from g to f6? And here, again, we get to look around and try to find sacrifices that might possibly work. And again, what's the fortunate news for us is that it's the same thing, which makes it very easy for us to remember. Here we can play bishop takes e6, which has actually never been played in the database. And the point is, after this recapture, we take back with our knight. We have sacrificed, a subscription for up to 5 people. No, thank you. In this position, we can already say that we have plenty of compensation for the 2 pawns that we have sacrificed. And we have this open e-file that's going to be coming in very handy soon, but we're attacking the queen for now. And the queen should probably want to consider taking control of the c7 square. If she ever moves too far away from c7, we're going to be introducing this fork. Also, maybe black at some point would love to be able to move this bishop, but then we're going to be hanging this g pawn. It looks like things are getting very clumsy for black. Now, objectively, this is actually fine for black. However, I think it would be kind of complicated to play this in a real game. I can easily imagine somebody going to b6. Looks like a totally normal move, but queen e2, and the computer is already very happy with the white position. Black's got to play some funky stuff like queen to b4 in order to come back to e7, just allowing us to do this fork now if we want, but maybe we kick your queen around a little bit. It's all like kind of weird, crazy stuff that I think will always end up favoring white. It's way easier to play. It's very difficult for black to find the right moves. But there is this exact continuation after queen to a5 if you play bishop to d2, and we're just trying to get the queen to move away from the c7 square. Well, there's exactly this move, queen to f5 attacking us. And what's actually really interesting about this line is that the computer wants for black to sacrifice back. And you can see black is the one that's up material, but maybe black should consider just giving that rook away, playing for something like bishop to d6, and all of a sudden, okay, black's a piece down, but suddenly there's a lot of pieces that are potentially coming over to our king, so we should probably be pretty safe. We should probably get this guy guarding the square and maybe bring a knight over for protection. We got to be a little bit extra careful here, but whenever it's 0-0 and people are sacrificing, I don't know, this still should be pretty fun for white, although, again, be a little bit careful here. Now, what is the actual best way for the opponents to continue when we do get to this position? After knight to d7, this was the move that Stockfish wanted. I'm suggesting bishop to c4, and after e6, castles, the move that the computer actually wants to play, in my mind, looks absolutely absurd. It's this move, pawn to h6, and earlier we saw that this was absolutely horrible. You're really begging for us to smash on e6. And okay, so yeah, why not? I will hop in for it. And we'll keep Stockfish here so you can see just kind of how crazy this gets. After f takes e6, queen to h5 check, black is going to be forced to play king to e7, where, can you guess what white should be playing in this position? It's the absolutely lovely move, bishop takes e6, a fantastic smash 'em up kind of move that you can play here with white. And if I was looking at this from black's point of view, I would be terrified. This is absolutely terrifying. But maybe queen e8, which lines the king and queen up on the same file, which as a human, I'm like, you can't do that. A rook is going to come to the e file. But okay, maybe if you're a computer, you totally can. But another point is that if they do take this bishop, rook to e1 will lead to all sorts of checkmates. Now, I don't want to go through all the lines. If here, you just lose material. If here, it's bishop to f4, and this will lead to a checkmate. The one line that maybe is most interesting is king to f6, where you should probably just know one maneuver, and that maneuver is queen to f3, forcing the king to go to g6, and now hitting him with king to e4, not letting the king run away. And if you go back to some sort of square, you're just going to get checkmated, so the king is going to have to come up, and obviously if you see the king coming up like this, you know checkmate is around the corner. And it's actually here where the best is to give up your queen, but if something like g5, you can imagine rook e3 is going to end the game immediately. Thank you for the follow. I'm not live on Twitch right now, but thank you to Christopher. I appreciate it. But coming back to this just for one last try, here's the way that black can get a very small advantage. After bishop takes e6, they can play queen to e8, and now we just need to move our queen somewhere. I mean, we can go like wherever, but okay, if it went here, which is I think what it said, we can move our queen somewhere else. And okay, I'll let you judge for yourself if you think the opponent would be happy here knowing that, okay, our next move is something like rook to e1. Even if you do attack our bishop, we can either trade it, we can move it back, we can do whatever. If you think your opponents can survive this position, then I guess you shouldn't play this gambit. But I don't know. Would you still play it even though this one crazy line exists? You'll let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye! Please subscribe. Bye!
If you're feeling trapped like a queen, no blunders, only sacrificing. See, well, you may have the blues. Never be a chicken when you lose.